Hello and welcome to Dice Tabletop. My name is Chris and today we are carrying on with this part 2 of getting the armor panels painted on the Warlord Titan. There is still so much detail that needs to be crammed in, so without further ado, let's just get on and get started. So from the heavy dry brush of pink that we applied in the last video, what we've ended up with is some really washed out sort of fleshy, gory areas. What we want to do is come back in and start adding that depth, that real rawness, that real fresh, ripped flesh look. So in order to achieve this look, I'm coming in with Flesh Tearers Red. I've already thinned my Flesh Tearers Red down in the bottle slightly, but I'm still adding it to water at around about a 50-50 mix of water to the Flesh Tearers Red. That's going to enable us to thin it down, and I'd rather work in multiple layers and build up brightness as opposed to coming in too strong and having to sort of work back down and losing some of the detail that we've already put in that the pinks created. This was a really rewarding part of the painting process. As you can see, there's such a visible difference when we start to add this red back in. Creates so much more depth and range, really looks angry, really looks disgusting. This was a great part just to start getting results early on and really starting to see the direction that we're going to end up with this insane build. With all our Gore now redefined, we can get all the pieces together and start to have a look at how much of a difference just that one little addition has made to how all of these arm bits look. As we start to bring in these details, as we start to add the armor trim, we're going to start moving further and further away. It all looked kind of a little bit washed out and maybe a little bit too pink beforehand, but we're going to be really coming back in now, really spitting out these colors and creating a nice wide visual range. But before we say a full goodbye to pink, it is making a slight reoccurrence here, just as a final dry brush now over the top of all of these redefined gory areas. They're a little bit too flat as a red. We do need to bring in a little bit of tonal range within there. So this is just a really thin, very light dry brush going all over the top. It's a little bit subtle, the effect, but it really does create a nice visual difference after this has been applied. And here we can now see the effect of that dry brush. As I say, it didn't detract too much from the red that we put in there, not as overpowering as it was last time, but it still just captures all of those nice raised edges, brings in a nice little bit of variation to that colour. Now that we have the red blocked back in, we can come back in and start building up a little bit more on the flesh tone. This needs to go towards a little bit more of a brown that I want. We need to also start picking out now some of the more really defined areas of this skin. So I'm coming in with two small dry brushes, as you can see there, as well as Barbarian Flesh Tone by the Army Painter. This is a nice little step up from the Talon Sand that we were using as, I say, the main base colour for the skin in the previous video. So I'm just coming around here now, everywhere that's going to be raised, everything that's going to have a nice little highlight to it, we're just coming back and picking that out as an individual focus point. Right, so I'm super happy now with how this Barbarian Flesh has turned out, as well as how the red is looking, so it's time to get all of the other pieces up to standard. And here we have what that looks like. Wow, this is such a difference now compared to where we started already. So I've taken the skin now as far as I can. They're working in multiple different stages. I sort of have to bring the skin up, add some detail, then maybe make some other adjustments. I am making this process up, obviously, as I go along, but there are some sort of logical steps in the ways I need to do things in my mind. So now that we have all of this skin tone up to the same standard across all of the pieces, next we're going to be coming in now and adding some further detail. We've got some really nice pustules, things that ooze, eyes to paint on, horns and teeth that need to get done, some staples. So there is plenty of things to keep us busy. Kicking us off then on this detailing journey is going to be this ankle piece. This has got a really wide variety of things that I'm going to encounter across the rest of the armor panel, so I'm going to use this as a bit of a test piece, hopefully figure out what we're going to do for everything else. We've got some pustules in there, we've got some weird growths as well as some eczema-y looking skin. But starting off, we're going to go with these pustules. We're moving up through three different yellows, as we can see here, starting with the dark one, moving through the middle, then up onto the light. First, we want to get a really nice even base coat down. I'm not priming anything underneath beforehand. Maybe I would have gone with a grey, like you'll see when I come down to paint the eyes later on, but I wanted to incorporate some of that underlying flesh tone within it. So we just build this up first of all and get a nice few even coverage layers. When that's done, that's already starting to look nice and icky and foul. So let's move on now and apply our middle layer. This is going to be moon yellow, and we're going to be stippling this on. I want to leave some of that colour underneath. I don't want a full coverage, and I also want to build up sort of a visual texture as well to really add some depth to the way that these spots would be looking. Now, unfortunately, there's not too much of a difference here that you can notice it that much on camera, but it's already starting to look a little bit spotted and speckled, so that's the texture that we're looking for already. Now, we need to sort of bring all of this down a little bit, like I've done on a couple of test pieces beforehand. So next we're coming over with Reikland Fresh Shade. We want to add this all over, just create a really nice, icky looking tone all over these spots. Once that has dried, we are then coming back in now with a variety of yellows, and we're just again starting off with the dark, building back up through that range and getting up to a nice bright yellow towards the end. After working back and forth between those colours, here we have a really nice dirty but also fresh growing looking pustules. Next up are these weird growths that we've got towards the top of the ankle section. What I want to do is start these off with a dark colour, build up towards a grey, and then I've got some real nice Nurgle's Rot that I haven't used before that I want to have a little go at using as well. So starting off, we just base coat these out with an Abaddon Black. Once that's dried, we're coming over the top now with a medium sea grey, just using a fine dry brush. From there, we're then going to be taking it a notch further with Spaceship Exterior, only catching the very, very edges of all of these little barnacles. In order to tie this together and darken it down a bit, we're coming back in with the Reikland Flesh Shade, and we're just putting good little coverage all over these barnacles now, really saturating that in. And then once we've left this to dry, we're coming back in and just adding a little bit of brightness back with the Spaceship Exterior over all of those barnacle edges again. Now these weird barnacle growths definitely look like they should be oozing, so I got a pot of Nurgle's Rot off a friend of mine, and I've never used it before, so why not? Let's just dive straight in, paint it first as last on this Titan. So I put a good sort of little load onto my brush, really glooped it on and made it look like it was running down out of all of these openings. And once that was dried, I was really happy with the result actually. So next up is to sort of look at this Ex-Marie type skin. What I want to do is paint this a grey and build up from there really. I don't want to put too much of a human-y bright flesh tone within that. I want some kind of dark, dead looking flesh within there. So we're starting off with this medium sea grey, going in now and picking up all of these little scales. And after applying that layer, we came back and just applied a really light little highlight with Spaceship Exterior all around the outside edges. Alright, there we have those three ideas tested out, and I'm really happy with all of these now, so it's a matter of just moving forward. Let's start applying these for the rest of the Titan, maybe developing on the process as we go, but let's wait and see. First up then, we need to batch paint all of these spots. Now there are quite a few, but on really limited type of armor panels. If it was a more sporadically placed across the entire model, these spots would make a little bit more sense. So I've come back in and I've made quite a few alterations to these as I've gone along. Because there was just such a stark contrast of little blobs and blocks of yellows hanging around. As you can start to see here on the head, I put a little bit too much yellow in, so I ended up detracting and coming back down from this. So this was a bit of an interesting one to sort of learn and develop from, really making sure not to just absolutely drench the thing in weird yellow spots that sort of looked out of place compared to other armor panels. Now another thing that'll help break up all of this yellow is I'm going to be painting all of these raised areas here, a sort of bruised look. Starting off with a Dark Reaper purple, once we've got all of that applied, and then coming back over the top with a thinned down red ink, just to try and add a little bit of anger into all of these raised areas. Now, it's only with hindsight that I know that I was absolutely putting too much yellow onto this, so unfortunately, after painting these bruised bits, I did come back and I painted the spots that are within them yellow. I fixed this later on though, so by the end result you will see a different colour on them. Now there's lots of little dimples all over this head, so I wanted to add some contrast for those, so we're bringing in the Flesh Terrors red again, and I'm just spotting that into all of these little dimples just to make them look like sort of freshly burst spots. Now, it was at this point that I could start to see that there was a little bit too much yellow going on this head. So I've come back in with the green ink, and I just added a tint to a few of these spots just to add a little bit of variety. So here we have the result now that that ink is dried. As I say, I have come back in and the spots in the bruised areas I have painted a separate colours to help sort of differentiate them, so by the time you see the end one, they will look slightly different. Right, now that I know sort of that rough bruised idea that I've got, how we're going to do these spots, it's just a matter now of getting stuck in with all the rest of the armour panels and getting all of this detail painted up so that it all matches. Next, we're going to be turning our attention to the teeth. This is also another thing that is all over the model as well. So we're going to be base coating all of these with a nice Talon sand to start off with. Now, there really are a lot that I need to get done here, and it's a good job that I did that test piece beforehand. I am going to slightly vary from what I did in the last video in regards to how I paint the teeth. I'm going to be using a streaking grime instead of the Reikland flesh shade. But before we get to that stage next, now after the Talon sand, we need to come in and add some detail to these teeth. So I broke out the bone white and we just added some styrations here to make it look almost like a horn, teethy type vibe. After that was done, I came in now with a streaking grime, thinned down some slightly with some mineral spirits, and we just got a really good wash all over this, making sure to get in all the recesses, letting it pull naturally, really helping build upon that nice worn horn type of look. That was left for a few minutes just to dry. Now we're coming in with some clean mineral spirits and a sponge, dabbing the sponge in the mineral spirits, wicking off any excess liquid that we then have in that sponge. We are now dabbing it all over that winter streaking grime, mainly focusing on all the top areas, trying to leave a little bit in the recesses. That is going to give a really nice tonal range now from the bone white that we've got underneath, leaving in those styrations, leaving in that depthness in the recesses, as you can see here. The last thing left to do then is to come back with skeletal bone and just apply a really, really light little dry brush over everything just to highlight all of those edges. Next up, it was time for a challenge. I want to try and paint as many eyes on this as I can. Now, I've never painted eyes before, so why not start now on the biggest model that I've ever painted, that if I mess up is going to be an absolute pain in the bum to go back and try and redo anything. So we're starting off here with a base coat of grey surface primer. This is a really good intermediary now between the base colour we got on the flesh and the white that we want to move up to. If we just started putting white on this first as last, the coverage wouldn't be brilliant and we'd get a really chalky surface. There are also a few sneaky little eyes hiding on other armour panels as well, so we've got to make sure that we go and capture them at the same time. With that grey primer down, we are now all set to come back in with two thin coats of white over the top. Now this white needs to be toned down. Eyes aren't bright white, and something that's on a Nurgle Warlord certainly is all going to be bloodshot, as if it's being strained and under a lot of stress. So we're coming in now with some red ink that's really been thinned down, and just applying a thin coat all over this white, just to get some nice redness and soreness into all of these eyes. Once that had dried, I then made a 50-50 mix of the white and the red and just came back over the top and sort of left all of the red in the recesses but brought a bit of brightness to the centre of the eye. Now that the base tone of the eyeball is all ready to work from, it's time to start building up and getting the detail in of the iris and the pupil. I looked up a little guide online of just how to paint an eyeball because I have no idea, and a general consensus of something easy to do was to start off with this bright white eyeball and then put a black circle where you want all the detail to be, build up the colour then within that black circle. So I want these eyes to be looking off in all different kinds of directions, but as a test piece, let's make one little eye here, a nice big black pupil staring right at us. Alright, test piece successful. Next we're going to be moving on now and let's try and do an actual coloured one. So we're going to start off with the biggest eye. I think that's going to be the easiest here, so let's have this looking off in the top right hand direction. Next up, we want to start with the darkest colour in the iris. Now, I want a blue eye for this one, so I'm going to be starting off with an abyssal blue. This is a really nice, deep, dark blue. We want to be getting this colour almost all the way up and covering the black. We want to leave a little bit of the black exposed all around that outside, and then bring it as much as we can into the centre, getting as much underneath that eyelid, because otherwise, if that doesn't look quite right, it's really going to break the immersion of this eye. When that's dry, we're now coming in now with bearing blue. Now you can see the difference in the type of brush that I'm using here. The one on the left is a really fine detail brush that I use for a lot of my work. The one on the right hand side, I'm not quite sure what these are from, but they are exceptionally fine and perfect for what we want to do here. Now this is moving in straight lines. We're starting on the outside and we want to be covering sort of slightly inside the blue that we left down last time and really creating that pattern that the iris has. When that's done, we're now coming in with Arctic blue and going slightly inside of that again. This will help create now multiple layers, try and build up some texture within that eye. Now that we've got our brightest colour down, next what we want to be doing is bringing our mid-tone back in towards the centre of the pupil. If you take a look at the eye, the iris is the brightest, always in the centre, towards the pupil, and towards the edge of it, it's always the darkest. So we just want to bring a little bit of that darkness back in now, so we're going to blend in between our middle and top layer there. Now this does end up looking a little bit messy, but it doesn't matter, because what we do now is we come in and we paint the pupil itself, and this tidies up all of those little edges that we haven't been able to blend properly, and you'll see that we've got a nice now range of a brightness in the centre of the iris, and it's a little darker towards the pupil, a little darker towards the outside. And as my first attempt at that, I'm pretty happy with how that's turned out. So let's move on now and paint a few others. I do want to have one black eye, so I've blacked one out entirely. I want to try and do like an Eye of Sauron, fiery demon looking eye in that one. So let's see if we can recreate what we did with the blue now with our eye top left, but this time we're going to be doing it in green instead. So we're going to be starting off with the extra dark green. Doing the exact same process as before, we want to get that close to the outside of the black circle that we've painted. Then coming inside that with our medium green, followed by a brighter green, and adding in the pupil. And unfortunately here I didn't notice that my camera died, so you're going to have to wait till the end to see how this bit turns out. Next up then, let's tackle all of these skulls. Starting off with the Talon Sand, we're going to follow a similar principle to what we did on the teeth. I like the result that that turned out as, we're probably going to bring these up maybe to a little bit brighter. Wait and see how we go. So we're getting two thin coats now of the Talon Sand all over this. It's a little bit interesting the way that these skulls are. Some of them look like they're bursting through the armour trim itself, others look like they're pressing up and making an indent, so I'm going to have to decide when I come to paint the trim which way round I want that to be. That'll make more sense later on. So bone white applied now as a highlight to all these skulls. We're going to be coming in with our streaking grime again, painting this on thinly. I ended up building up this in a couple of coats, so the end result you'll see is slightly darker than what goes down here. But we went around being careful not to spill too much onto the flesh. And then once that was all dried, we're coming back in with our mineral spirit soaked sponge, dabbing it off, and creating that really nice deep recess grime that the beautiful streaking grime always leaves behind. One quick blast of a hairdryer later just to flash off all that excess white spirit, and I'm happy with how these skulls have turned out. I will be coming back and adding more to this muscle, this and the other shoulder panel. I'm kind of undecided on the full direction I want to go with these two pieces, so I'm going to sort of come back and leave those bits until last. Another piece that I was unsure of the direction of was the feathers on this front left shoulder panel. I really wasn't too sure what I wanted to do with this. Like some kind of parrot peacock design would be really cool, but I think it'd detract too much from the overall sort of Nurgle chaosy type vibe. So I was chatting with a friend of mine and he came up with the idea of sort of a pigeon themed one, and I quite like the way that that sat. So here is my attempt from looking up images of pigeon feathers online to try and get some really sort of tatty feathered look on this armour panel. As I was blacking out the feathers, I'd realised I'd left this part at the top right thinking that that might be part of it as well, but no, it doesn't really work as feathers. So what I've done is I've come back in now with our Talon Sand and blended that back up to the rest of the flesh tone. So the process here really was to just blend black and grey, starting off with a really dark grey, and just keep building up in layers, highlighting all of these individual strands as we go, just to try and build a really nice depth of range in that colour of the feather. When that was done, we came back in with a medium grey and we applied all of that to the sort of spines of the feathers themselves. Now overall I'm pretty happy with how this has turned out. It doesn't really come across on camera the same way as it does in person, but I did need to blend these in a little bit more and knock a bit of that colour out of it, so what better not than to come back in with our trusty Reichland Flesh shade and just add a little bit of brown into that colour, which I think now really helps blend it in with the background and also not stand out too much and look out of place. Right, it's back to our test piece because it's nearly time to get started on the gold trim. Now I had an idea to go out and pick up some of this crackling texture to see whether or not I could add any more extra interest onto the trim itself. I experimented with painting it straight on as well as sort of putting a PVA glue underbase to it, but I just wasn't really happy with the specific one that I bought and the results that it gave me, so I scrapped that idea. So instead let's find out what type of copper look we want to start with. So I'm testing out Tinny Tin and Hammered Copper by Vallejo. We've got the Tinny Tin on the left hand side, Hammered Copper there on the right. The difference in the two is so noticeable, it's unbelievable. We are definitely going to be going with the Tinny Tin. It is such a vividly interesting starting point. So here we can see now all of that trim has been base coated in that Tinny Tin colour. Next up we're going to be coming in with Gehenna's Gold, but we're going to be stippling that all over. My idea here is to create a really worn brass look. By starting off with this dark colour, we're going to be adding loads of fleckled little highlights then all over the place to look like scratches and chips, then coming over the top of this now shortly with Lead Belcher again, and we're going to knock down some of that colour. Here we are then. Sorry, it was Runefang Steel, not Lead Belcher. Exactly the same process. Loading up our sponge, dabbing off some of the excess, and then putting some nice scratches and chips all in between those two colours now that we've got down. And here is our final result, and I am absolutely blown away with how this looks. Again, the camera doesn't pick it up properly, unfortunately, but this just looks so real and vivid and realistic. Unfortunately, though, it's a little bit too shiny for a Warlord Titan in the 41st millennium. So we're going to go now and experiment with adding some shade back to this. I'm coming in now with the Rust Streaks. This is a brighter version of the Streaking Grime. I've applied it a bit thick here as a test, only to the left hand side, just to see what the difference would be now between how this is going to look after it's dried and been wicked off, compared to how it looks as just being paint. With that dry, we can now start to take a look at the difference. Now, I am really happy with the way that the Rust Streaks has dried on this, but I'm also really happy with the way the natural paint looks without being washed. I think what I'm going to need to do is, when I come to do this finally now on all of the other pieces, is to apply a thinned down version of the Rust Streaks instead of a thick one. We should be able to capture some of that tonal depth that we've lost, but also then take out some of that shininess and have that nice sort of weathered, rusted metal look within the whole tone of that metal itself. So after we've got all of the armor panel now base coated with Tinny Tin, we are going to move in and start building up on our stippling. I experimented with using a few larger pieces of sponge. The small piece that I had in the tweezers there would take me absolutely ages if I was to do the entire armor trim just with that itself. So I got a really nice, sturdy, robust piece of packing foam. This covered a large surface area all at once and also enabled me to put a bit of force behind it as well to get some thicker and thinner splotches all over the place. So happy with how that was turning out. We can just move along and get this done across all of the trim now. And after that, we're now coming in with the silver. Now, I used Runefang silver on the test piece, and the reason why I'm using this specific piece to start off with is because it's got that large surface area that's going to be predominantly hidden when it goes on the model. So any mess ups that I do now, I can correct moving forward, and I'm glad that I did do this test piece because Runefang steel, when it was applied over this large of an area, ended up being too bright and detracting. So as you see here, I'm just coming back in with Tinny Tin and knocking down some of that Runefang steel, and instead I've moved forward on the rest of the model using Lead Belcher for my metal tone. So it did take a few hours. It was just a matter of sitting down and powering through it, as has been a lot of this project, but I'm really happy now with where we are at with how this metal tone is looking. And moving on then, it's time for rivets.
No, God!
I've already painted an ungodly number of these. I think we're over 2,000 so far, and this is certainly adding a few more to that number, and we've got plenty more to go yet when we come to do the weapons. Once all of those have been painted then in Lead Belcher, and coming back in now with the Rust Streaks, we're first applying a really thick wash around all of the rivets just to get a real nice depth to those, and then once that's done, we're coming back over and applying our thin down Rust Streaks, and that's going to help us get that real nice depth to the rest of that armor trim without detracting too much from the shine that we did previously. Once that are dried, I then come back in with a dried sponge and just gently rub this over all of the top areas just to knock off any of that rust streaks and all my brightness so I can get those colors back. And with those last pieces of the trim done, let's put it together and find out how it's looking. So here we have the fruits of today's labour. I am super excited now with how this is coming along. Unfortunately, I couldn't get everything done and put into this video that I needed to. There is still some parts left of these armour panels that need to be painted. This video would have just taken too long and would have gone on for too long if I tried to cram all of it into one. So by the time you see this Titan next, there will probably be some additional things done to it, but I will keep you updated as we go along. Now, I just want to say thank you guys ever so much from the support from your last video. That absolutely blew up my channel for me, and it is all thanks to you guys watching, supporting, liking and sharing the video. I read the comments. I'm doing my best to reply to you all in the comments where I can. I am taking on board your suggestions, and I've just absolutely loved the interaction that I've had from you guys. So I just want to say a massive thank you. I know I say it every time, but really thank you so much for all of your support. So if you like this video, please drop a like down below, subscribe if you're not already, and there is going to be plenty more Warlord madness coming up. So thank you ever so much, and I will catch you all next time. Goodbye.